Ladies, gents and teddy bears, Ted and I travel back in time to RAF Upwood in Cambridgeshire. It dates its history back to the days of the Royal Flying Corps in 1917, before the Royal Air Force was established. Initially, the airfield was named RFC Bury, named after the village that it sits on, shared with Upwood. Eventually it was renamed to Upwood, and with a handful of various squadrons using the airfield as a training station with aircraft such as the BE-2, Avro 504 and other types of biplanes. Upwood closed in 1919, but it wasn't until the air defence was in need of expansion, and in 1934 many new airfields were being built. Upwood was chosen to become a medium bomber station, and constructions began on C-type hangars and other types of buildings. When RAF Upwood finally reopened, on the 27th of February 1937, it welcomed its first flying unit, No. 52 Squadron, who were equipped with the Hawker Hinds. 63 Squadron also joined them that year with Hawker Audaxes. Now, the two squadrons became training units and were later re-equipped with Fairey Battles and the Avro Anson aircraft. In 1939, 90 Squadron made Upwood its new home, flying the Bristol Blenheims and trained in air-to-air firing and bombing. They were joined by 35 Squadron in February 1940, who operated both Blenheims and Avro Ansons. Both these squadrons remained in their training duties and were not called up to frontline combat. On the 8th of April 1940, the squadrons merged and formed a new squadron, No. 17 OTU, Operational Training Unit. Now, an OTU is like 29 Squadron of RAF Coningsby, except it's called an Operational Conversion Unit today. And the purpose of an OTU, or an OCU, it's to train the crew on a particular aircraft. 17 OTU trained aircrew on the Vickers Wellington. Upwood's involvement at this stage of World War II was very minimal. "139 Squadron, while based in France during 1940, lost most of its Blenheims whilst being overrun by the German advance. On the 12th of May 1940, 139 Squadron made a raid on the Maastricht bridges in Belgium to try to halt the German advance, but they lost 7 of their 9 Blenheims. This was a devastating loss to the squadron, and daylight raids still continued until further more losses were suffered. The squadron was in need of aircraft, but their aircraft funding would actually come from the people. In fact, fundraising for aircraft was not uncommon. I have always mentioned during our Lakenheath live streams that it was a people's war, and in 1939, in Lakenheath village, the people raised money for a Spitfire and raised nearly £9,000. Now, a Jamaican newspaper called The Gleaner set up a fundraiser called the Bombers for Britain Fund. They had raised so much money through their newspaper and the people of Jamaica, they helped equip 139 Squadron with a total of 12 Bristol Blenheims. In recognition for this generous act, the people of Jamaica would never be forgotten, and thus the squadron added Jamaica to their squadron name, becoming 139 Jamaica Squadron on the 26th of June 1941. "139 Jamaica Squadron, the first squadron to carry out the first ever RAF sortie in World War II with a single Blenheim on the 3rd of September 1939, arrived with their de Havilland Mosquito in January 1944. The Mosquito was a British twin-engine multi-role aircraft made out of wood and powered by 2 Rolls-Royce Merlin V12 engines rated at 1710 horsepower with a maximum speed of 415 miles per hour. With a service ceiling around 37,000 feet, it was also capable of bringing back parts of forests, trees, telegram poles and cables from its tree-skimming high-low level attack missions. It was the production of the Mosquito that actually led to the furniture rationing due to its wooden construction. 139 Jamaica Squadron were a Pathfinder squadron. The Pathfinders would lead in front of the main bomber force, locate and mark targets by dropping flares onto the targets to be bombed. This was so that the bombers could see their targets more accurately. 139 Jamaica Squadron were already a very experienced Pathfinder squadron when they arrived at RAF Upwood, and their first mission was on the 2nd of February, using just a single Mosquito to mark targets over Berlin. They took part in many missions, but at a cost. Between 1944 to 1945, based at RAF Upwood, the squadron carried out several raids over Berlin, Hamburg, Cologne and other cities. They lost over 32 aircraft, with 19 men killed and several becoming prisoners of war. We light the way, the motto of 156 Squadron, and one of the original Pathfinder squadrons made Upwood their home on the 5th of March 1944, arriving with their Avro Lancasters. 10 days after their arrival, 156 Squadron flew their first mission from Upwood, attacking Stuttgart. On a cold night of the 30th of March 1944, 156 Squadron with their GT tailcode Lancasters were about to join a bomber force of nearly 800 bombers to raid Nuremberg. It was a raid labelled as the most catastrophic for Bomber Command, deemed as a massacre. They lost 82 aircraft, 543 men killed, with over 150 men made POWs. 156 Squadron were in those figures of losses, with 4 of their Lancasters failing to return. We have spoken about the weather on our shows and how much of an impact it has on a bombing mission. It was snowing that day, freezing conditions, which created contrails that left trail marks of the RAF bombers. And with each aircraft battered and then turning into flames, this could potentially light up your nearby aircraft in formation. To make matters worse, on the Nuremberg raid, the cloud base was low, making the targets unclear for the Pathfinders and for the bomber force who relied on the Pathfinders to light the targets. The German night fighters also had special flares to assist in lighting up the bombers too, with yellow and green flares.
Left behind, looks after the emergency communication system and everything else. Quite often he's also trained as a gunner in case one of these needs replacing. So
this wonderful artwork depicts a very special Lancaster GTQ with serial number ND875. This was a Lancaster that actually survived 108 missions, a century bomber. Of the 7,377 Avro Lancasters made, only 35 ever made it to over 100 missions in Bomber Command. Between April and May 1945, 156 Squadron took part in Operation Manna, a humanitarian sortie to drop food to the people of the Netherlands, and Operation Exodus, repatriating former prisoners of war. The squadron left Upwood on the 27th of June 1945 to RAF Witten, where they disbanded in September of that year. During the Cold War period, there were many changes to RAF Upwood, with several squadrons being stationed at Upwood, such as 105 Squadron with their Mosquitoes, 102 Squadron, who were flying the consolidated B-24 Liberators, 214 Squadron, along with 148 Squadron flying the Avro Lincolns. In 1955, RAF Upwood was to receive its very first jet aircraft, the English Electric Canberra, operated by 18 Squadron, and then later joining them with more Canberra 61 Squadron. Upwood's 7, 18, 35, 50 and 61 Squadrons flew with their 32 Canberras to Cyprus on the 19th of October 1956 and took part in Operation Musketeer. They took part in the raids on targets in Egypt. All squadrons arrived back to Upwood with their aircraft on Christmas Eve in 1956. Between 1957 to 1961 saw a series of squadrons disbanding until the last ever flying unit, 35 Squadron, disbanded on the 11th of September 1961. Upwood's flying days were now over for the RAF, and until the base was operated by the United States Air Force in 1981, saw the RAF Regiment and various training centres making Upwood their home. RAF Upwood became a satellite station to RAF Alconbury with the United States Air Force and was hosted by the 10th Tactical Reconnaissance Wing. It was also home to the 423rd Medical Squadron with a US Air Force hospital. On the 26th of October 2012, RAF Upwood closed its doors not only to its patients for the last time, but also to the rest of the world.